Hello, my name is Rabbi Menachem Kreiman, the Jewish chaplain for Ironwood State Prison, Chickasaw Valley State Prison. Right now, in the Jewish calendar, we're entering a period called the 3 weeks of mourning, where we remember the destruction of the temple. And I want to just talk about the temple and all of its glory, and later on get into the 3 weeks of mourning, how to celebrate those 3 weeks, and how to think about the destruction and how we can better ourselves. But to first focus on the temple, I want to say that the temple was not just a blessing for the Jewish people, and additionally it was also a blessing for the entire nation, every nation. And it says that if every nation would have known the power of the temple, they would appoint guards to set up around the temple to give extra protection. So what is the temple? In the Torah, God says, "Build for me a sanctuary and I will dwell in them." First of all, the rabbis ask, how come it says, "Build for me a temple and I will dwell in them"? It should have said, "Build for me a temple and I will dwell in it." But the fact that God uses that word "them" is a special lesson for us now that we don't have our temple. God promises us if we build a temple within ourselves, we build any temple, wherever it may be, God will dwell in them. But there's something very special about the way God dwelled in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. It says that there was a few different parts of the temple. One was the Kodesh, the Holy. One was the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. Only the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would go there on Yom Kippur once a year to pray on behalf of the whole Jewish nation. And the items there, with its dimensions, physically cannot fit inside that Holy of Holies. But we see that God made a miracle, and that in the Holy of Holies, because God is dwelling inside there, there's a miracle that, even though the dimensions say it wouldn't fit inside there, it does. Besides for that, in the temple, they would bring sacrifices daily, they would have sin offerings, and there was a lot of meat that would be slaughtered there and sitting there. Yet God made a miracle, maybe a small one, but He made that there was never a fly ever seen in the temple. Another miracle was that it says that no woman ever suffered a miscarriage during the temple times. So we see this temple was a very, very special place, a place where there was holiness, and we saw where the physical and the spiritual meet. Another example is that 3 times a year, the Jewish people would go to Jerusalem to celebrate the holidays, namely Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And even though a lot of Jewish people were there and it was very full, we see that God made another miracle, that there was room for everyone. And during the prayers, when we had to bow down, even though when we were all standing, we were shoulder to shoulder, when it came time to bow, there was space for everyone. So we see this temple as a very, very special place where God had His glory shining abundantly. And now that we're entering the 3 weeks, it's very, very appropriate to learn about the temple, because we know God promises us a third temple. So by us learning and being involved with temple, whether it's through the first and second temple or looking at Ezekiel's prophecy of the third temple, we can help do our parts to bring Mashiach, have the third temple rebuilt. Now let us learn about the 3 weeks and how to celebrate the mourning and destruction and see the light beyond the tunnel of how we, through ourselves, can change the world, change ourselves, and bring Mashiach, the redemption. I'm here to deliver a message about the 3 weeks of mourning, one of the saddest times in the Jewish calendar. The beginning starts off with a fast called the 17th of Tammuz. It starts on Sunday, June 27th at dawn and goes till nightfall. Then 3 weeks later is the 9th of Av, which is the day that both the first and second temple were destroyed 5 centuries apart. We remember this day as a fast day, which this year it starts on Saturday, July 17th at sunset and goes through the next day to July 18th, 2021, and finishes at nightfall. These days are very sad. This whole 3-week period is a time when we mourn the destruction of the temple and we think of how we can rebuild it through our acts of good deeds. If this is something you want to participate in this year, please make sure to speak with your chaplains or your community resource manager and see how you can celebrate these fast days and join in this mourning of the temple. And a few other things happened on the 17th of Tammuz, besides for the siege that ultimately was the destruction of the temple. When the Jewish people left Egypt and Moses went up to Har Sinai, the Mount Sinai, to receive the 10 Commandments, he saw that the Jewish people there were celebrating and worshiping a golden calf, an idol, one of the cardinal sins that we as Jewish people are not supposed to do. And Moses took the 10 Commandments and broke them on the 17th of Tammuz. So this day is not just, it has a past history of other horrible things and tragic things happening. There's also that because there was a siege around Jerusalem, on 17th of Tammuz, the Jewish people were no longer able to celebrate the daily sacrifice because they had a lack of sheep. And therefore that was another tragic time, another reason of mourning. There's also a Torah scroll was burnt. This is something that is very sacred and holy, and to have a Torah scroll burnt on this day is also a very tragic time. And another event that took place was an idol was placed in the temple. Another horrible, tragic thing. And for all these reasons, this is a really horrible time that we look back at and reflect on. Going to the 9th of Av, there are some other things that happened. Besides for both temples being destroyed, the first one in the year 423 before Common Era, and the second temple in the year 69, Common Era. It's also in the year 1313, before Common Era, the spies reported some bad reports of Israel. What happened was the Jewish people were getting ready to conquer Israel. They left Egypt, and some people had an idea to first spy out the land and see how would be a good way to conquer the land. God did not command this. This was something that Moses said, if you want to, you can. And each tribe designated their own leader to go on this journey. There are two of the spies named Joshua, Yeshua, and Caleb, that went and only said good things, but the other 10 spies decided they want to say evil things and say how the fruit will be very big and there are giants in the land and we cannot conquer the land. Because of these evil reports, God told Moses that the Jewish people cannot go into Israel, and that generation, because they want to go back to Egypt, will have to die in the desert. And ultimately, Moses as well died in the desert, and Joshua, Yeshua, led the Jewish people into Israel. So this occurrence also happened on the 9th of Av many years before the destruction of the temple. So now, another little thing that Hasidus, mysticism, brings is that there's always another point of view. There is always a positive outlook. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains, why would the spies want to give an evil report of the land of Israel? That was the ultimate goal after leaving Egypt, to go to Israel. So why would they want to say bad things and stay in the desert? So the interpretation that Lubavitcher Rebbe gives is that They liked it in the desert. They had their food provided for them. They had the manna. It says their clothes, it grew with them and was cleaned. They didn't have to bring it to a laundromat, and they didn't have to work. They knew that once they went to Israel, they would have to work the land. They wouldn't be able to study all day. So it says that the 10 spies, their report that they made was evil, but they had good intentions. They really just wanted to be good for everybody, where they can just study without any interruptions. But we see that that's not what God wanted. God did not take us out of Egypt to just relax in the glory of God and have the clouds protecting us. But God wants us to take this world, take the Israel, the Canaan, where Joshua led the Jewish people to, and make this world a better place by toiling, by being involved with the land, not just merely studying. We have to do both. So another thing we see is that there's a person named Nahum, Ish Gamzu. That was his nickname. He was called Ish Gamzu, means a man, and Ish Gamzu, a man that said, this too is good. Because every time he would go about his business, things might seem bad to him, but he would say, Gamzu Latova, this is too for the good. And there's a story one time where the Jewish people wanted to appease the Roman emperor, and they wanted to ask him to be a little bit nicer to the Jewish people there. And Nahum was designated to bring a big chest full of gold and silver to the Roman king. On his way there, he stopped off at an inn, and the innkeeper saw this chest full of these valuables and stole it all, replaced it with some dirt and soil. Nahum kept going on his way. The chest was heavy as before, and he didn't know any different. He presented it to the king, and the king was infuriated. He thought that the Jewish people were mocking him, presenting him with dirt. But Nahum just said, Gam Zulatova, this too is for the good. They locked him in prison, and they waited for a trial. And during this trial, it says Elijah the prophet came as one of the advisors and said, this might be a blessing in the skies. Perhaps this is the same sand that Abraham, our forefather, used when he had to battle the other kings. It says he took the sand and threw it and became arrows and weapons of destruction. So the king decided he's going to try it out because he was at war for a while with not too much success. So lo and behold, there was a miracle that happened, and the dirt was actually helping them win the war. They would throw the dirt, and arrows and other weapons of destruction would go to the enemies, and the Roman king was very pleased that he was able to win the war, and he not only listened to Nahum and helped be nice to the Jewish people there, he also gave him many, many rewards for that. So we see how Nahum Ish Gamzu, sometimes there are some bad things that could be bad in the beginning, but at the end, it's good. Then there's another rabbi we like to quote is Rabbi Akiva. He came later, and his saying was, Kol man da'avid rachmana latav avid. Everything the merciful one does is for the good. There is no evil, it's all good. And the story goes that one time he was going to a village, and as the sun was setting, he realized he did not have a place to stay. So he started asking one person and then another if he could stay there for the night. But each person told him they have no room for him. So he was not upset. He just knew that everything God does is for the good, and decided to camp out in the forests. So he took his belongings with him, and he lit his candle, he had his chicken to wake him up in the morning, and he had his donkey to carry all his stuff. As the sun is setting and it's getting darker, he's studying and minding his own business. All of a sudden, a strong wind comes and blows out the candle. He has no other way of lighting it again, but he does not complain. He says, everything God does is for the good. A few moments later, he sees a predator take his chicken into the woods. But again, he doesn't complain because he knows everything God does is for the good. Moments later, if you think it couldn't get any worse, an even bigger predator comes and takes his donkey. And now he's stuck there. He has no lights. He has no more of his animals to help him carry his stuff. So he decides to go to sleep because he knows that everything is good. The next morning, he wakes up and he sees that last night in that village he wants to stay in, there were robbers that came and they were stealing and hurting other people there. He realized that God was saving him by making sure that no one let him stay overnight. He was saved. And he realized even more than that, that when the robbers, if the robbers would have been in the village, they for sure would have seen his candle, and then he would have been a target. Or maybe one of his animals would make some noise. He realized that God took care of him in every angle. He made sure he wouldn't stay in the village. His candle wouldn't be there to alert people where he is. His chicken and his donkey wouldn't make any noises. So we see that Rabbi Akiva, he had this positive outlook. He knew that everything God does is for the good. So the same thing is also we have to apply to these 3 weeks of mourning. Well, right now we are in exile and this is a very sad time. There's also something a little bit deeper. And we know that when Mashiach comes, Messiah, we will learn the secrets of the Torah. So, in a way to prepare for those days, we have to also learn secrets of the Torah. For example, if you were to go to an art show, you would want to brush up on how well you know art. You wouldn't study sports if you're going to an art exhibit. You would study art. So the same thing with Mashiach. When Messiah comes, we need to start studying secrets of the Torah, so then we can help prepare for those good days. And like I said before, Chassidus always has a very positive outlook. There's something it can learn even from things that seem very dark. And the example is that in the Torah, there's a thing called, has the rebukes. Some people call it the curses of the Torah, but in Chassidus we don't call them curses, we call them blessings in disguise. And over there it talks about, God says, if you don't listen to me, so and so will happen. And it seems very, very scary. But like I said, the Chassidus teaches us another way to look at it. So one example is that the first Lubavitch Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, he would read these rebukes in the Torah scroll. And one year, for some reason, he had to travel away, so someone else read this Torah portion instead of him. And his son later became the Mitzvah Rebbe, the middle rabbi, got very sick and ill as he was hearing these rebukes. And everyone there were asking him, every year you hear this. How come this year it affected you in such a negative way? And just to let you know, this was around the high holidays where there's some fast coming up, and he was so sick they weren't sure if he was even able to fast. And he told those people who were asking him, when my father reads the Torah, referring to the Alter Rebbe, all I hear are blessings. But this year, because he wasn't reading it, I heard the curses, I heard the rebuke. So we see that if you have the right outlook, you can look at things in a positive way. One instance with the rebukes is, in one of the rebukes or curses, it says that you will be so, if you don't listen to the Torah, you'll be so poor that you'll need 10 ladies will have to cook with one oven, which seems like a really hard thing for 10 different people to rely on one oven. That could take many, many hours or days to get food, bread, and it seems like a really horrible thing. But when we look at through Chassidus, we see that what does 10 mean? 10 refers to the 10 attributes. Like I mentioned in a different time, it talks about the wisdom, understanding, knowledge, kindness, strictness, harmony, victory, humbleness, foundation, and kingship. All those 10 things are going to be baked. It says, B'tanor echad, in one oven. Echad is oneness. That's God. And that's our ultimate goal, is to get all of our different attributes working in harmony together with this oneness. So when you look at it at face value from the Torah, it does seem like it could be a curse. But when you look at it through the Hasidus outlook, you realize that this could be also a blessing, having everything working together. So in the same means, I want to also explain there's a movement called Hasidus, which looks at everything in a positive way. When it comes to talking about people, instead of telling them you're not doing things right, it shows you how to do things even better. And then there's the idea of Musar, which is a very negative way and just focuses on the negative. One example of how Hasidus works versus Musar is that there's one time the sun was having an argument with the wind, and they both said that they can take off this man's coats. There's a man walking, so the wind said, watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to blow with a strong wind, and that will take off his coats. So the wind started blowing, and the man started buttoning his coats. He did one button first. Then the wind went even stronger, and he put a second button. And the wind was giving all he got, and the man took his arms and just kept on holding his coat onto him. And no matter what the wind did, it could not get the coat off. But when the sun decided to give it a shot, the sun just shone. And as the rays were penetrating, the man just took off the coat by himself. The sun didn't have to work hard, just had to show the glory of the sun. The same thing, and then eventually, the man took off his coats effortlessly. So sometimes when people are trying to tell other people what to do, or you see the evil inclination will find ways to keep that coat on. But when you see the Torah, you see its beauty and its light. You don't need anyone to tell you something. You see it, you'll take off your coat. So this, as a closing note, we know that Hashem, God, does and keeps all the commandments. Just like He commands the Jewish people with the 613 commandments, so does God. He also keeps all the 613 commandments in His own way. And we know one of the commandments is not to destroy the temple. So we have to hold God to this and say, how can you let and give permission for the temple to be destroyed? Because we know everything that happens is because God gives permission for it to happen. So if God has given permission for the temple to be destroyed, how is He going in conjunction with the 613 commandments? So we say that in general, you're not allowed to destroy the temple in any way. But there is a time when it seems like it's destruction, but really not. And that's our case here. God wasn't just destroying the temple, but what He was doing was He was getting ready to rebuild the third temple. And it says that if you're going to build a better building, you can destroy the old one, so you can rebuild another one. So in fact, on the 9th of Av, the redemption already is starting. Because God destroyed the temple, He wasn't destroying it just to destroy it, but He was letting it get destroyed so that He can build the third temple. So right now, we are in exile, and it is a sad time that we mourn the destruction of the temple. However, we have to understand that the same thing is that because God let the temple get destroyed, that means we also are starting the redemption, and we need to keep on doing acts of goodness and kindness that will ultimately tip the scale for good, and God will redeem us and bring the Messiah, build the third temple. So as we go about these 3 weeks, let us take time to reflect upon ourselves and see how we can better ourselves. Because it says that the temple was destroyed because people were having hatred for no reason, just hating people for no reason. And that crime itself, God said, the temple has to be destroyed. There were 2 rabbis actually that were saying, this is a great thing. God had an anger, but He did not let it out on the people. He let it out on stone and wood. Instead of destroying the Jewish people, He just destroyed a building. But we have to take this as a message. We have to do good and realize that right now it is hard, but we have to remember that God promised us that He will build a third temple, and by us doing well, doing good to ourselves, and having controlled love, just the opposite of hatred for no reason. We have to have love without any reason. Just do goodness and kindness. And that, God willing, will help bring the redemption and the building of the third temple. Shalom.
Chaplain.